Hey, thanks for joining us for today's sermon. My name is Phil. I'm one of the pastors here at Berean Baptist Church in Mansfield, Ohio. And we would love to help you connect to your next step towards following Jesus. If you visit our website at bereanfamily.com, you can reach out to us. We would love to pray for you and just connect you to the ministries here, what God is doing in our region. And so please check us out there. And here's today's sermon.
Some of you may recognize me, others may not, but I have a deep connection here at Berean. First of all, my son Isaiah was here for a number of years leading worship, and he is now in Minnesota, and so it's good to be here with a church that he served with and loved very much, he and Leonie, but it's good to be here. But I have another deep connection, and that connection goes back a number of years ago, and I'll tell you a bit of a story before I kind of tell you that one. You'll put it all together. I serve for a ministry called TTI, the Timothy Initiative, and I travel basically the world speaking for the Timothy Initiative. I pastored for some 40 years. My wife and I served in a church in Michigan. And so now we spend our life just traveling, speaking, and enjoying an amazing ministry. And by the way, that you're a big part of. And I personally want to say thank you for your support. You have had a big part in a ministry that is literally sweeping the world with the gospel. I'm not making that up. I mean sweeping the world with the gospel. And you are a big part of that. So thanks for your generous giving and your heart to be a help and a blessing there. So how did I get connected there? That's how this whole thing kind of comes together, and I'm here today. About 20-something years ago, I was speaking at a pastor's conference, and I got up, did my thing, got finished. It was a big conference, and got done, and a few years went by, about 5 or 6 years, and I got a phone call from a man who said, hey, I was wondering if I could buy you lunch. Well, to be honest with you, anybody can buy me lunch. And I said, sure, I'm in. I said, do I know you? He said, no, but I know you. And I said, great, let's go. And so we met and sat down, and he told me a story. He said, 5 or 6 years ago, I was at a pastor's conference. He said, I was a broken man. He said, my ministry was not going in the right direction. My heart was in a bad place. It just wasn't good. I sat and I listened to you. And he said, and God stirred my soul in a way I never thought it would. And man, things changed. He said, I resigned the church I was at, put some things in order in my life, and began to get some things in the right direction, and I planted a church. That church today now is one of the largest churches in the state of Michigan. And he said, and I just wanted to thank you. He said, I never had a chance to say thanks for speaking the truth into my life and God doing a work that I said, listen, I'm blessed. His name was Jeff. I said, Jeff, I'm just blown away by it. I thank God for God's goodness. Don't we celebrate how good God is, everybody? That's what we do. So I thought that was great. About the same time that guy took me to lunch, there was this guy that rolled in on his Harley Davidson to our church. We had a large biker ministry, literally discipling hundreds of bikers. And here he came with his bad self. Rolled in on his Harley, his wife and his daughters, and I remember them showing up at the church, and I thought, oh my, what a mess. Aren't you glad God could use messes? And that guy got saved. He got saved. His wife got saved. His girls got saved. And God began to do a work. Called him in the ministry. He went to this crazy place called Alaska. Why, I don't know. But he went to Alaska and ended up in a place called Mansfield, Ohio, at Berean Baptist Church. Yep, that's Dan. The story continues. Every single Sunday morning for many, many years now, I awake early and I pray for a list of pastors that came out from our ministry. It's quite a long list. Our church in Michigan grew to somewhere around 10,000 members, and so we have a lot of folks that surrendered to ministry, and God's been very kind there. One of those is your pastor. And every Sunday morning I get up and I pray for him about 5:30. I pray for him and the long list, and I send him a text every Sunday morning. I shoot him a text and I say, I just want to tell you I prayed for you today. Pray God use you. Pray God bless you. And pray God do a work in your church. Things like that. Well, about a year ago, I sent him a text after praying for him that morning as I did the others. And he sent me a text back and he said, I've already preached. I thought, it's 5:30 in the morning. Where in the world are you preaching at 5:30 in the morning? He said, I'm in Tanzania. I wasn't even sure I knew where Tanzania was. Somewhere on the east coast of Africa. And he said this, I'm with a friend of yours. I said, I have friends in Tanzania? And he said, I'm with a guy that took you to lunch a number of years ago. The two of them were in Tanzania together, serving God, and sitting there having a conversation about some guy who preached and God did a work in their life. And he said, we were just talking about you. I said, wow, that's pretty incredible. Don't you believe God's hand is amazing? Just amazing. The story continues. A few days later, I received a phone call from a founder of a ministry called the Timothy Initiative. He called me and he said, listen, I was wondering if you could chat a few minutes. His name is David, and he said, David said, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about a ministry. He said, I had a couple guys call me and tell me that you would fit what we need perfectly. We need somebody to travel for us, and we need someone who can step in a pulpit and proclaim the good news of Jesus, proclaim the gospel, which is what the Timothy Initiative is all about. And we were wondering, I said, well, let's give her a look and pray about it. My wife and I began to pray about it, began to wonder what God had for us. And some months ago, we went on staff, and now we travel and enjoy ourselves proclaiming the gospel, but yet representing a ministry that is so powerful, it is literally transforming one country at a time, and you're a part of it. Thanks, Berean. You're incredible, and we're blessed to be part of that. Now, why did I tell you that story? One, I wanted you to see the connection that we have here. But also, isn't it amazing how you think to yourself, how can those stories be true? How can God orchestrate, put things together, do things? Is he that real? Is God that big? Does God do things like that where years before he begins to set things in order, and knowing that a biker would roll in one day and come to know Jesus, and a pastor's life would be transformed, and one day they'd be in Tanzania together. And by the way, you got to know this. God saw that all before it happened. Come on, church, let's celebrate who he is. You with me? Amazing. And then God put us back to work, and we were excited about, we'd been preaching and traveling, but not really connected with a ministry. And so now today we just, basically week after week, we're in some city, someplace, stepping into a pulpit, proclaiming the gospel, and sharing this amazing ministry called TTI. So I'm blessed to be here, and I appreciate the privilege, but I would make this little statement. The story I told you is the truth, and I'm not lying. Now, that's an interesting statement if you think about it. That's a statement we often say when we tell a story or we share something that's very hard to believe. When we say something that's like, is that really true? Did that really happen? We make the statement, don't we? We'll say, I'm telling the truth, I'm not lying. But do you realize that is not a new statement to our culture? It is a statement that was made many, many, many years ago by an incredible man by the name of the Apostle Paul. Romans chapter number 9, if you have your Bibles and want to follow along, I'll show you this very statement. Romans chapter number 9 and verse number 1, incredible. The Apostle Paul makes the very, very same statement. There in Romans chapter number 9 and verse number 1, the Apostle Paul, he is speaking to a group of people there in Rome, and he says this. He said, I say the truth in Christ. I lie not. I'm speaking the truth in Christ. I'm not lying. Because he's getting ready to tell you something that's going to be hard to believe. He's getting ready to share with the world something that's almost like, there's no way, Paul. There's no way that you can really, really mean what you're about to say. There's no way that you can really, really, are you kidding me? Check it out. There in Romans chapter number 9, verse 1, he continues on, and he's talking about, he says, I'm speaking the truth, and I'm not lying. And he goes on to say some things about his heart. He goes on to talk about how his heart is broken. He's going on to say how that deep down in his soul, there in verse number 2, that man, he's got a brokenness inside of him. He's got a burden in his heart that's so deep. And if you continue to go down to verse number 3, that's where he says something that's like, wait a minute. Is that really the truth? Wait a minute. He said this, I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren. For I could wish that I myself, are you getting this? Were accursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of the people I love. Can I put that to you in modern language? He's saying, I want my people that I love to know Jesus so badly, I would give up heaven for that. And you know what he says? I'm telling the truth. I'm not lying. Now let's get honest for a few minutes. Let's get honest with the people around us. Let's get honest with those that, love us. Let's get honest. Come on, it's Sunday morning. It's honest moment. I'm not quite sure I can do that. You say, what kind of guy do we have preaching this morning? An honest one. A man who's willing to look in the eye and tell you, I'm not sure I've got to the place where I'd be willing to give up heaven for some drunk in the gutter. That I'd be willing to give up heaven for some addict on the street. That I'd be willing to give up heaven for somebody that doesn't know Jesus, that's rejected him, that doesn't want him. But the Apostle Paul declared to the world, I would wish myself to be accursed, and I'd be separated from Christ. I wish that I would give up heaven for the people I love to come to know Jesus. Wow, that's some kind of statement, huh, church? Well, there are 3 thoughts I'd like to share with you this morning. First of all, I want to believe like that. I want to believe like that. I want to believe like that. I want to be able to say that with all honesty and sincerity, that I would give up heaven for my neighbor who doesn't know Jesus. That I would give up heaven for my son, my daughter, my siblings, my folks. Wow, what a statement. What a statement to make to the world. And to emphasize it by saying, I'm telling the truth. I'm not lying. Wow, I want to believe like that. There's a story I love to tell, and it's a story of a little girl who lived up the street from the church, and the little girl's family was such a mess. Her dad checked out on her even before she was born, abandoned her. She was being raised by a single mom who was just a mess. Mom loved the party life, and every Friday, Mom would head to the bar, and she would tell her little girl, here, you lock the door till, I'll get home, and you just fall asleep on the couch, watch some TV. There's a frozen pizza in the refrigerator. You have that, and you'll be in business. But do me a favor, don't open the door for anybody. She's just a little girl, and she said, okay, Mommy. She'd do her thing every Friday night. Mom would go off to the bar. Little girl would go in there, turn the TV on. She'd stick her little pizza in the microwave, and she'd live her Friday nights and fall asleep on the couch and wake up Saturday morning. Well, one Saturday morning, she woke up with a knock at the door. She went to and looked through the blinds that were all broken, and she looked out there, and she saw 2 old ladies there. She thought, boy, they look harmless to me. She opened the door just a crack, and she said, ladies, my mama told me I am not supposed to open this door for anybody, but you 2 look harmless. What do you want? They said, we're from the church up the street, and we just came by and wanted to invite you to church. The little girl said, me? I can go? They said, yeah, you can come. They said, wait, really? I can come to church? She'd never been to church before, knew nothing about it whatsoever. The lady said, here, and she passed through a little flyer through the door, and it gave the time of the church service and what was going to go on. And the little girl said, I can't wait. I'm going to ask my mom when she wakes up. Later on, Mama woke up. The little girl went in and said, Mama, these 2 ladies came. I knew you told me I wasn't allowed to open the door, but Mama, they looked harmless, and they just were from the church a couple blocks up the road, and they said I can come to church. Mama, can I go? Mama, can I go? Mama, can I go? You know when kids do that, you're going to go. She said, well, okay, you can go tomorrow if you want to, but I'm going out tonight. And so she said, okay, Mama. So Mom went out and did her thing. Man, she couldn't hardly sleep that Saturday night. She woke up. She was so excited. She got dressed and headed the 2 blocks down the road and went into church, and she'd never heard anything like it before. It was amazing. She began to hear about somebody who loved her no matter what, somebody who cared about her. She began to meet people that were kind and courteous and had something different about them. And by the way, there ought to be something different about us, huh, believers? There was something different, and man, it was amazing. She went home and she couldn't stop talking about it. She's telling her mom all about it, and it was incredible. And she said, Mama, can I go again next week? She said, whatever. Every week, man, she'd get up in the morning and she'd head to church, and she'd get up in the morning and she'd head to church. She went 10 weeks in a row. Now, I'll tell you how you know if you're old here today. Because many, many years ago in Baptist churches, they used to give away what they called 10-week pins. You ever had one of those? Don't raise your hand. They'd give away what they called 10-week pins if you made it 10 weeks in a row. Well, the little girl made it 10 weeks in a row, and the teacher said to her, it's a big week for you next week. We're going to be giving you a special award. You're going to get a 10-week pin. The little girl said, I am? Yep, we're going to honor you. She was so excited about it. She went home and said, Mama, they're going to honor me at church next week. They're going to give me what they call a 10-week pin because I made it 10 weeks in a row. And I was wondering, will you go, Mama? Will you go, Mama? Please, will you go? Mom said, well, we'll see what happens. Saturday night, Mom went out and did her thing. Little girl went to sleep. She was so pumped about it that she overslept. She woke up, she said, I gotta go. She ran to her closet, put on her best dress, which wasn't much of anything. And she ran into her mom's bedroom and said, Mama, she's shaking her mom. I gotta go if you're gonna go, Mama, we gotta go. And she couldn't get her up, and she just said, I gotta go. She took off running down the street, man. She's beating feet. She's running down the road to the street. She looks over her shoulder. She says, God, please help me. God, please help me. God, please help me. She's praying, God, help me get there on time. And she's running so fast, man, she got her feet tangled up, and she tripped and skid on the dirt road. And she got up and she wiped herself off and looked over her shoulder and said, God, don't push. She gets there to church. Her teacher said, you're okay. You made it on time. No worries about it. They gave her award. Man, everybody applauded for her. It was an incredible moment. And the teacher said, listen, because it's your day, you pick out any story you like in the Bible. The little girl said, I don't really know a lot of Bible stories yet, but I do know the one I heard you tell a few weeks ago about that guy named Jonah, and the big fish. And I love that story. It was so exciting. And she said, okay. And so she told the story about Jonah, how he disobeyed God and ended up in the fish and got right with God, and God did a big work, and it was awesome. Well, the day ended, and Monday was school day. She got up and got her lunch and headed off to school. And she gets to school, and she's sitting at her desk, and they're going through the day. And sometime in the middle of the day, the teacher got up and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a session on science. Please take out your science books. So they all got their science books out. She said, turn to chapter number 8. They went to chapter number 8. We're going to talk about things of the sea. But before we do, anybody got any stories about things of the sea? Little girl waved her hand and said, I know one. And the teacher said, well, what is it? She said, it's a story that I heard yesterday in church. It's a story about this guy by the name of Jonah who just didn't obey God and didn't do what he was supposed to do and just wasn't what he was supposed to be. And next thing you know, he ends up on this boat going the wrong direction. And then he ends up, teacher begins to roll her eyes. And next thing you know, Jonah ends up in the sea and gets swallowed by a big fish. And the teacher says, stop right there. Stop right there. She said, listen, little girl. She said, I want you in the class to know school is fact and church is fiction. And the little girl said, well, then when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask Jonah if he got swallowed by a big fish. And the teacher got a real cocky look on her face and said, well, what if Jonah went to hell? The little girl says, well, you ask him when you get there. You know what? I want to believe like that little girl believed. I want to believe that when I need to get down the road, God will help me down the road. I want to believe like that. I want to believe God's word like that. I want to believe who God is. I want to believe what God does. I want to believe God's that real. Come on, church. We want to believe more than we've ever believed before. And the Apostle Paul believed in this amazing place called heaven. He believed in God's grace and God's goodness and the gospel so much that he said, I'll give up heaven. Because it's that real. Doggone it, I wish I believed that much. I want to believe like that. And every day I ask God, help me believe more and more. Help me believe in who you are and what you want to do and what you're up to. I want to believe. There's a second thing in this story that kind of spoke to my heart. I want to believe like that. But I also want to learn to love like that. Man, he must have loved those people with a love that was so deep. He said, God, I'd be accursed. I'd give up heaven. I want to love like that. Me too. I want to love like that. Many years ago in a church up in Michigan, and I know Michigan's not a good subject in Ohio, but up in Michigan there was a church a number of years ago. The pastor got up in the pulpit to make the announcements on Sunday morning, and it's not a big church, just an average church. And he said, listen, we've got a real need in our community. We've got a bunch of children in the area whose parents are just a wreck. Most of their homes are broken, and we've got a desire that we've got somebody that's willing to drive a bus and go pick up children. And we were hoping that maybe we could raise the money to buy a school bus. So he said to the church congregation, he said, would you pray about what God might put on your heart? And sitting out in the auditorium, there was a man that God did something very special inside of him. That man had just retired from General Motors. Just before his retirement, he went and bought a brand new car, paid cash for it, figured I'll retire, I'll have a brand new car paid for that won't give me any trouble, my home is paid for, I'll be out of debt, and I'll be able to live in a retirement on a fixed income, and I'll be fine. But when the pastor got up and talked about that bus and those children, something happened inside of him. That afternoon, he called the pastor. He said, Pastor, listen, I heard what you said. He said, here's what I'm going to do. He said, tomorrow I'm going to the bank, and I'm going to refinance my car. He said, I'm going to buy it again a second time. I'm going to get a loan out on it, and I'm going to give you the money, and I want you to go buy a school bus. He said, are you sure? He said, absolutely. The man went to the bank, got the money, came and brought it to the pastor. They bought a bus. That bus began to go into the community and pick up children, one after another after another. And one day that school bus drove down a road called Pauline Street. It was an old dirt road, a bunch of those square box houses. The third house from the end, that bus pulled up in front of a home and beeped the horn. Two boys and a little girl came out of the door of that house, a home that was broken, a home that had a father who was an addict, a mom who gave birth to one of those first children when she was 15, a household that was full of pain and agony and hurt like you and I can never imagine. Those three kids got on the bus and they went to the church for the very first time in their lives. They arrived there to hear the gospel and the good news of Jesus, which you give out each and every day here at Berean. And the oldest boy, God began to do a work in his life like he never thought. And I today stand here because a man bought a bus. And I was just a little boy who came from brokenness, where children should never be allowed to grow up. But the gospel came looking for me. It wasn't long after that I gave my heart to Jesus. And the rest is history. By the way, the man's name was Mr. Good. What else would it be? Hey, why would a man who never met a little broken boy love like that? Why would a man who's worked his life away, looking forward to retirement, buy his car a second time? Because he loved with the kind of love that I wish I could love with. He loved somebody bigger than himself. He loved in a way that God loved and that the Apostle Paul loved. He loved so deeply. That's why Paul said, I'd be willing to give up heaven for the people I love to know Jesus. Doggone it, I want to love like that. Anybody else? I want to love like that. I've said to myself a number of times over the last few months, I wish I believed like that. I wish I loved like that. But then the third and final thought, I wish I could give like that. Could give like that. Paul, you're willing to give heaven away? Listen, there isn't anything you have that's more valuable than heaven. There's nothing in your portfolio. There's nothing you own. There's no real estate investments. There is nothing that you own that is more incredible than where you will spend eternity in heaven. Do you realize the riches of heaven, that makes us multi-gazillionaires? Come on, church. It does. I'm not sure what a gazillionaire is, but it works. Boy, I want to learn to give like that. Many years ago, my wife and I, we took a little church up in Michigan and had about 80 people, and we began the ministry. I was pastor and taking care of the church as things go, and the church was in such disarray, but man, God began to do some crazy stuff. We began to watch God save people at a rate that was incredible. The building began to get filled up. We baptized 96 weeks in a row, new believers. At one time, we baptized twice 100 believers at one time. It was incredible. But our auditorium began to fill up. We didn't know what to do. Man, the place is jam-packed. It was an old kind of old Baptist buildings that were rectangular shaped. And man, it was just packed to capacity, and you couldn't get in, couldn't get out. And I thought, what are we going to do? We need more room. Well, at the back of the auditorium, it was similar to that, but not quite as large. But there was an office, and there was a nursery area back there. And I made the suggestion, let's tear out the back wall, go to the very back of the auditorium. We'll set up chairs. We'll get new chairs back there. It'll add about 150 people to the place, and we'll begin to get some more folks in. And everybody said, that's a great idea. And then, that one guy, of course, there's that one guy who's got to ask that awful question. Do we have the money? And I said, we do, but it's still in your pocket. A lot of truth there, isn't it? So I said, well, let's pray about what God might do. And so we began to pray about it. Well, at the same time, my wife and I, and my 3 boys, including Isaiah, we were going every Friday night to a very special place. There were a number of ladies that lived in it was an old mansion of a home that someone had converted into a home for special ladies that couldn't take care of themselves necessarily, but yet wanted some freedom. You get what I'm talking about? And they couldn't get out a lot, but yet they could get out some. And so they lived in this big place, and they had people to caretake them there. And we would go there every Friday night. And, my wife, by the way, is the one who taught my son Isaiah how to play the piano. And so we would go there, and they would, my wife would play the piano, and my boys would sing. And then I would preach. And every Friday night, we'd have church for them. It was great, Well, there was a lady who lived there. Her name was Josephine Straub. Josephine Straub was probably 158 or something. I don't know how old she was, but she was old. And but she struggled with Parkinson's. And she came to me after one of the services. She said, Pastor Jim, she said, listen, I don't have an official pastor, and I was wondering if you could become my official pastor. And I said, listen, let's make it official. I'd be honored to officially be your official pastor. So how about we pick you up on Sunday and introduce you to your official church, and we can make it official. She said, that'd be great. She said, I'll officially be waiting for you. I said, great. So we picked her up, and my wife and I took her, introduced her to her church, and it was a great celebration. And she couldn't come much. She just wasn't able to get out a lot, but we would still go every Friday night. And one of the things we would take them was always a recording of our services. So she would see what was going on at her official church, right? Well, she'd heard about the need for the, expansion. So we got there one Friday night. We get done doing, our church service. She says, listen, Pastor Jim, could I see a minute? I said, yeah. So we went into a room, and she said, listen, I know that the church needs to expand, and it's my official church, and I want to do something official. I said, what do you want to do, Josephine Straub? She said, I want to pay for it. I said, huh? I said, all of it? She said, I want to pay for all of it. I want to pay for the entire expansion of the building. I want to pay for the entire renovation. I said, really? She said, yeah. She said, if you would do me a favor. She said, there's my checkbook. I said, no kidding. So we got her checkbook open, and she began to write. And I know it sounds bad. I'm not as good a believer as her, but she was shaking with her Parkinson's, and I was hoping she'd add another zero to that thing. You know what I'm talking about? She handed me a check with was the largest sum of money I'd ever touched in my life up to that time. I'd never touched that amount of money. I remember running out to the car where my kids, where my boys and Kara were waiting, and I said, "You won't believe what God just did. God just did something incredible. God just paid for the entire renovation of the building, and it's amazing." And Josephine was touched by God, and she gave the money and wrote the check. And man, I'll tell you what, we were so excited. We got home. Now, you got to know me a little bit. I'm a little wired. Whenever Dan will tell you about me, he'll tell you, man, he's got some major ADHD going on. Always have, always will. I've always been wired and extremely hyper, and I couldn't do anything, so I just got on the phone and I started calling a bunch of the young guys in the church. I said, "Fellas, show up at the church in a little bit. We're going to do some crazy stuff." So a bunch of guys came. I said, "Bring sledgehammers, bring everything you need, hammer. We're going to." They got there. We tore the whole back wall of the building out. We tore the whole back out. We cleaned it all up, man. It was incredible. It was summertime. We blew the windows out because we're getting new windows, and I thought, this is incredible. Sunday morning comes around. Show up there, people begin to walk in and say, "What happened?" I said, "God happened." God showed up, and man, we got a check to pay for the entire renovation of the building. This is amazing, and look what God did. Place is applauding, they're excited, a bunch of new believers that are just thrilled at a real God doing some real stuff. It was awesome. Monday morning, the church secretary took the check to the bank, and it wasn't any good. What a leader I am. I just tore out the back of a building with no money. I believe God was calling me to Alaska at that moment. Josephine called me on the phone and she said, "Listen," she said, "Pastor Jim, I'm so sorry about that." She said, "I have the money, but I have to die before you get it." Right then, you don't know how to pray. Honest guy. I said, "Josephine, God's got it. And we'll figure it out." And so Tuesday morning, we had a staff meeting, and every Tuesday, we had a lady who came to the church, and she, part of our church, who volunteered to take seniors who couldn't drive to places and run errands. So Josephine had asked for somebody to take her somewhere, and so this lady took her, and took her out to lunch and took her to this place, and I think she got her sewing machine fixed, and then she took her to a Meijer to get a few things. And that day at Meijer, on that Tuesday, she bought a new blue dress. She went home, went to her room, laid down in the bed, and that day Josephine Straub went to heaven. I promise you I did not touch her. But here's what I know. I preached her funeral 3 days later in that brand new blue dress that she bought for herself. And the plan of God went to work. We cashed a check, and Josephine Straub paid for the renovation of that building. And your pastor got saved because of that lady in that place, and countless numbers of others, because she knew something about giving. She understood what it meant to give, and that's why the Apostle Paul said, "I'm telling you the truth. I'm not lying. I would give up heaven, the most valuable thing I could ever have, for people to know Jesus." And 40 years of ministry later for me, I want to be like that one day when I grow up. You know what's crazy? I have met some people like that now. They pastor in places that we couldn't even live. They live in villages where there is no electricity or water. They plant churches every day that you have supported in countries like Nigeria. Whether you know this or not, more Christians have been martyred in Nigeria than in all the countries put together in the world. We have thousands of churches that TTI is planting in Nigeria because of you. You said you met some people like that. Pastors who've had their wives kidnapped, their homes burnt down. Pastors in India and Pakistan. Pastors who have suffered in ways that I never have. I stayed at the Hampton Inn last night. They had cable and breakfast. And they slept on the ground so they could go to a village and tell somebody about Jesus that they loved. Risking their life because in many of the countries that we go to, it's illegal to share the gospel. Yeah. We are blessed to spend the rest of our lives introducing a ministry to people like I've never seen before, ever. I've never watched the sacrifice, the giving, the belief, the love that I've seen in this. And I hope my last breath will be send the gospel to the world. And if I can be part of that, I want to be. And thank you for you being part. I'm going to ask you to stand, if you would, please, in this auditorium. It's great to be with you. If you look up at me, if you would, please, for just a moment. Just want to ask a question. Whatever this means to you or however this works, did God speak to you today? Did God in any way whatsoever speak to you? Whatever that means. Maybe you need Jesus. Maybe you know somebody who needs Jesus. Maybe some of these thoughts were stirring in your soul as they were in mine. But not kind of sneaking this in with heads bowed, just a bunch of people getting honest for a minute. You'd say, yeah, and I don't even know how, maybe I didn't even hit it, but God spoke to you this morning, personally. If you're like that, you'd say, that was me, Pastor Jim. God did speak to me. If he spoke to one person, that's great. Anybody? If you just slip your hand up, God spoke to me. God spoke to me. Would you hold them up? Let me look around. I just want to be able to pray. There are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of hands. Way up in the balcony, back row. I see you guys back there. You got to get here early for those seats. All over this building, many of your hands are still up. God spoke to you. It'd be awful rude if he didn't speak back. I would say to you, whatever he's talking to you about, jump in. The journey's incredible. God, I have no idea exactly what you're going to do in this place, but I know you've been busy. Dan shared with me about how many folks were baptized last month, and my heart leaped. He told me about some things going on here, and I was just so thrilled and excited. But yet, God, there's so much more to be done. And evidently, you're still speaking to hearts right here, right now. There were men that raised their hands, dozens of them. And I pray, God, they would yield to whatever you told them to do. There were some amazing ladies, God, that slipped their hands up because you spoke into their heart and their soul. There were some young people, even some kids, that slipped their hands up because you spoke to them because you're real. And help us, God, to believe like Paul believed, to love like Paul loved, and to learn to give like Paul gave. God, bless these that raise their hands. And Father, as we wrap up this thing with a song, may God, you continue to bless. Thank you in Jesus' incredible name. Amen. God bless you, church.